It was about break of day when Don Quixote issued forth from the inn, so delighted to see himself knighted, that the joy thereof almost burst his horse's girths. But recollecting the advice of his most It was about break of day when Don Quixote issued forth from the inn, so delighted to see himself knighted, that the joy thereof almost burst his horse's girths. But recollecting the advice of his host concerning the necessary provisions for his undertaking, especially the articles of money and clean shirts, he resolved to return home, and furnish himself accordingly, and also provide himself with a squire, purposing to take into his service a certain country fellow of the neighborhood, who was poor and had children, yet was very fit for the squirely office of chivalry. With this thought, he turned Rocinante towards his village, but had not gone far, when on his right hand from a thicket hard by, he fancied he heard a weak voice, as of a person complaining. Scarcely had he heard it, when he said, I thank heaven for the favor it does me, in laying before me so early an opportunity of complying with the duty of my profession, and of reaping the fruit of my honorable desires. These are, doubtless, the cries of some distressed person who stands in need of my protection and assistance. And turning the reins, he put Rocinante forward towards the place from whence he thought the voice came. He had entered but a few paces into the wood when he saw a mare tied to an oak, and a lad to another, stripped from the waist onwards, who was the person that cried out, and not without cause, for a stout country fellow was laying on him very severely with a belt, and accompanying every lash with a reprimand and a word of advice. For, said he, the tongue slow and the eyes quick. The boy answered, I will do so no more, dear sir. Indeed, I will never do so again, and I promise for the future to take more care of the flock. Now Don Quixote, seeing what passed, said in an angry tone, Discourteous knight, it ill becomes thee to meddle with one who is not able to defend himself. Get upon thy horse and take thy lance. For he had also a lance leaning against the oak to which the mare was fastened. For I'll make thee know that it is cowardly to do what thou art doing. The countryman, seeing such a figure coming towards him, armed from head to foot, and brandishing his lance at his face, gave himself up for a dead man, and, with good words, answered, Señor Cavalier, this lad whom I am chastising is a servant of mine. I employ him to tend a flock of sheep, which I have hereabouts, and he is so careless that I lose one every day. And because I correct him for his negligence or roguery, he says I do it out of covetousness, and for an excuse not to pay him his wages. But upon my word, he lies. Lies in my presence, pitiful rascal, said Don Quixote. By the sun that shines upon us, I have a good mind to run thee through and through with this lance. Pay him immediately without further reply. If not, I vow I will dispatch and annihilate thee in a moment. Untie him instantly. The countryman hung down his head and without replying a word untied the boy. Don Quixote asked the lad how much his master owed him, who answered 9 months' wages at 7 sixpences a month. Don Quixote reckoned it, and found that it amounted to 63 sixpences, so he bade the countryman instantly disburse them, otherwise he must expect to die for it. The fellow in a fright cried out that it was not so much, for he must deduct the price of 3 pair of shoes he had given the lad upon account, and 6 pence for physic when he was not well. All this is very right, said Don Quixote, but set the shoes and the physic against the stripes you have given him undeservedly, so that upon these accounts he owes you nothing. The mischief is, Señor Cavalier, said the countryman, that I have no money about me, but let Andres go home with me, and I will pay him to the last penny. I go with him, said the lad, not I, for when he has me alone he will lace my jacket with a vengeance. He will not do so, replied Don Quixote. It is sufficient that I lay my commands upon him, and upon condition he swears to me by the order of knighthood which he has received, I will let him go free, and will be bound for the payment. And so saying, he clapped spurs to Rocinante, and was soon away off. The countryman followed him with all the eyes he had, and when Don Quixote was out of sight, he turned to his man Andres and said, Come hither, child, I am resolved to pay thee what I owe thee, as that redresser of wrongs commanded me. So you shall, said Andres, and you will do well to perform what that honest gentleman has commanded, who, if you do not pay me, will certainly come back and execute what he has threatened. And so say I too, said the countryman, but to show thee how much I love thee, I am resolved to augment the debt to increase the payment. And taking him by the arm, he tied him again to the tree, where he laid upon him smartly, with many threats of worse in store for him. Andres went away in a passion, vowing he would find out the valorous Don Quixote de la Mancha, tell him all that had passed, and his master should pay for it sevenfold. The valorous Don Quixote was extremely well pleased with himself for this. The valorous Don Quixote was extremely well pleased with himself for this, and coming presently to the center of 4 roads, he stood still a while, after the manner of knights errant, to consider which he should take. At last he let go the reins, submitting to be guided by his horse, who took the direct road toward his stable. Having gone about 2 miles, Don Quixote discovered a company of people, who, as it afterwards appeared, were certain merchants of Toledo, going to buy silks in Murcia. There were 6 of them, and they came with their umbrellas, 4 servants on horseback, and 3 muleteers on foot. Scarce had Don Quixote espied them, when, imagining in some new adventure, he determined to imitate, as near as possible he could, what he had read in his books. So he settled himself firmly in his stirrups, grasped his lance, covered his breast with his target, and, posting himself in the midst of the highway, stood waiting the coming of those knights errant, for such he judged them to be. When they were come so near as to be seen and heard, raising his voice, he, with an arrogant air, cried out, Let the whole world stand, if the whole world does not confess that there is not in the whole world a damsel more beautiful than the Empress of La Mancha, the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso. The merchants stopped at these words, and by them, together with the strange figure of the knight, soon perceived the madness of the speaker. Whereupon one of them, who was somewhat of a wag, said to him, Señor Cavalier, we do not know who this lady you mention may be. Let us but see her, and if she is of so great beauty as you intimate, we will with all our hearts confess that truth you demand from us. Should I show her to you? Replied Don Quixote, where would be the merit in confessing a truth so evident? The business is that without seeing her you believe. Confess, affirm, swear, and maintain it, and if not, I challenge you all to battle, proud and monstrous as you are, and whether you come on one by one as the laws of chivalry require, or all together, as is the custom and wicked practice of those of your stamp, here I wait for you, confiding in the justice of my cause. Señor Cavalier, replied the merchant, I beseech your worship in the name of all the princes here present, in order that we may not lay a burden upon our consciences by confessing a thing we never saw nor heard, that your worship would be pleased to show us some picture of this lady, though no bigger than a barley corn, and herewith we shall rest satisfied, and your worship remain contented. For indeed we are already so inclined to side with your worship, that I verily believe, if her picture showed her as ugly as sin, we should, just to oblige you, protest that she was as beautiful as an angel. Base scoundrels, answered the knight in a rage, the lady Dulcinea is perfection itself, and you shall pay dear for your monstrous ignorance of her transcendent beauty. And so saying, with his lance couched, he ran with so much fury at him who had spoken, that if good fortune had not ordered it that Rocinante stumbled and fell in the midst of his career, it had gone hard with the daring merchant. Rocinante fell, and his master lay rolling about the field a good while, endeavoring to rise, but in vain, so encumbered was he with his lance, target, spurs, and helmet, and with the weight of his antique armor. While he was thus struggling to get up, he continued calling out, "Fly not, ye dastardly rabble! Stay, ye race of slaves! For it is through my horse's fault and not my own that I lie here." A muleteer of the company, not over good-natured, hearing the poor fallen gentleman speak in this arrogant fashion, could not stand it, so coming to him took the lance, and after he had broken it to pieces with one of the splinters, he so belabored Don Quixote that in spite of his armor he threshed him as though he were wheat. His masters cried out to leave him, but the muleteer was provoked, and would not quit the game until he had quite spent the remainder of his rage. So, running for the other pieces of the lance, he finished the breaking them upon the poor fallen knight, who, notwithstanding the tempest of blows that rained upon him, never shut his mouth, threatening heaven and earth and those assassins, for such they seemed to him. At length the fellow was tired, and the merchants went on their way, leaving the poor belabored knight, who, when he found himself alone, tried again to raise himself. But if he could not do it when whole and well, how should he when bruised and almost battered to pieces? Yet still he thought himself a happy man, looking upon this as a misfortune peculiar to knights errant, and imputing the whole to his horse's fault. But certainly he was horribly bruised, and finding that he was not able to stir, he began to lament his fate in such sort as he thought a knight-errant ought to do. Just at that moment there passed a countryman of his own village, who had been carrying a load of wheat to the mill, who, seeing a man lying stretched on the earth, came up and asked him who he was, and what ailed him. Don Quixote returned him no answer, but went on with his lamentation, upon which the man, who did not know what to make of it all, took off his visor, which was beaten to pieces, wiped his face, which was covered with dust, and the moment he had done wiping it, knew him, and said, Señor Quijada. Señor Quijada. Señor Quijada, how come your worship in this condition? To which the knight returned him nothing but rambling answers. The good man, seeing this, made a shift to take off his back and breastpiece, to see if he had received any wound, but he saw no sign of any hurt. Then he endeavored to raise him from the ground, and with much ado set him upon his ass, as being the beast of easier carriage. He gathered together all the arms, not excepting the broken pieces of the lance, and tied them upon Rocinante, and so taking him by the bridle, and his ass by the halter, went on toward his village, utterly bewildered by the nonsense which Don Quixote, groaning amain, and so bruised and knocked about that he could scarce keep upon the ass, continued to pour out. In this fashion they reached the village about sunset, but the peasants stayed until the night was a little advanced, that the people might not see the poor battered gentleman so scurvily mounted. When they arrived at Don Quixote's house, it was all in an uproar. The priest and the barber, who was also the doctor of the place, Don Quixote's great friends, happened to be there, and the housekeeper was saying to them, "What is your opinion, Señor Pero Pérez?" For that was the priest's name, "of my master's misfortune, for neither he nor his horse, nor the target, nor the lance, nor the armor have been seen these 6 days past. Woe is me! I am verily persuaded that these books of knight-errantry, which he is so often reading, have turned his brain, and now I think of it, I have often heard him say, talking to himself, that he would turn knight-errant, and go about the world in quest of adventure. Out upon all such books that have thus spoiled the finest understanding in all La Mancha. The niece joined with her and said, "No, no, Mr. Nicolas, for that was the barber's name, that it has often happened that my honored uncle has continued poring over these books of misadventures 2 whole days and nights. Then throwing the book out of his hand, he would draw his sword and fence with the walls, and when he was heartily tired, he would say he had killed 4 giants as tall as so many steeples, and that the sweat which ran from him when weary was the blood of the wounds he had received in the fight. Then he would presently drink off a large jug of cold water, and be as quiet and well as ever, telling us that water was a most precious liquor brought him by a great enchanter who was his friend. But I take the blame of all this to myself, that I did not tell you, gentlemen, of my dear uncle's extravagances, before they had got so bad that you might have prevented them, by burning all those books of which he has so great store, and which justly deserve to be committed to the flames. I say the name, said the priest, and tomorrow shall not pass without overhauling them and condemning them to the fire, that they may no more turn the head of my good friend." All this the peasant and Don Quixote overheard, and the former called to them to open the door. At hearing this they came all out, and, as some knew their friend, and others their master and uncle, they all ran to embrace him, who was not yet alighted from the ass, for indeed he could not. "Forbear, all of you," he cried, "for I am sorely wounded through my horse's fault. Carry me to my bed, and, if it be possible, send for the sage Urganda to search and heal my wounds. Look ye," said the horsekeeper immediately, "if my heart did not tell me right, on which leg my master halted. Get up stairs, for without the help of that same Urganda we shall find a way to cure you. We shall find a way to cure you ourselves." "Confounded, confounded, say I again, and 100 times confounded, be those books of knight-errantry that have brought your worship to this pass." They carried him to his room, and searching for his wounds, found none at all, but he told them he was only bruised by a great fall he got when his horse Rocinante, as he was fighting with 10 of the most prodigious and audacious giants that were to be found on the earth. "Ho, ho," said the priest. "Ho, ho," says the priest. "What? There are giants too, are there? Well, I shall set fire to them all before tomorrow night." They asked Don Quixote 1,000 questions, and he would answer nothing, but only desired something to eat, and that they would let him sleep, which was what he stood most in need of. Whilst he still slept on, the priest asked the niece for the keys of the chamber where the books were, those authors of the mischief, and she delivered them with a very good will. They all went in, and the housekeeper with them. There were above 100 volumes in folio. There were above 100 volumes in folio, very well bound, besides a great many small ones. And the priest ordered the barber to reach him the books one by one, that he might see what they were about, for perhaps they might find some that did not deserve to be burned. "No," said the niece, "there is no reason why any of them should be spared, for they have all been mischief makers. It will be best to fling them out of the window into the courtyard, and make a pile of them, and set fire to it, or else carry them into the backyard, and there make a bonfire of them, and the smoke will offend nobody." The housekeeper said the same, but the priest would not agree to that without first reading the titles at least. Those books took a great deal of overhauling. The first, after examination, was spared. The second was condemned utterly, the priest bidding the housekeeper open the casement and throw it into the yard as the beginning of the pile for their intended bonfire, and, nothing loth, she sent it flying. Another lot was sentenced, and, as there were great numbers of them, the housekeeper, to save herself the trouble of the stairs, threw them all the shortest way out the window. At length the priest got tired of dipping first into one and then into another volume, so ordered all that were left, whatever they might be, to be burned. But while they were thus busy, they suddenly heard Don Quixote calling out to valorous knights to exert their prowess, and, running to him, found him out of bed, raving and bawling, and laying furiously about him with his drawn sword. as broad awake as if he had never been asleep. They closed in with him, and laid him upon his bed by main force, when, after he was little composed, turning himself to the priest, he said, "Certainly, my lord Archbishop, it is a great disgrace to us who call ourselves the 12 peers, to let the knights courtiers carry off the victory without more opposition, after we, the adventurers, had gained the prize in the 3 preceding days." "Say no more," said the priest. "What is lost today may be won tomorrow. Mind your health for the present, for I think you must needs be extremely fatigued, if not sorely wounded." "Wounded? No," said Don Quixote, "but bruised and battered I am for certain, for that beast Don Roldan has pounded me to mash with the trunk of an oak, and all out of mere envy, because he sees that I am the sole rival of his prowess. But let me never more be called Rinaldo of Montalban, if, as soon as I am able to rise from this bed, I do not make him pay dear for it, in spite of all his enchantments. But at present bring me some breakfast, for I know nothing will do me so much good, and let me alone to revenge myself." They did so, gave him some victuals, and then he fell asleep again, leaving them in fresh wonder of his madness.